Season 5 of Fargo has now come to an end, and this finale definitely went down in a different way to what I expected, with most of the story with Roy and Dorothy feeling like it was actually wrapped up in the penultimate episode. This finale actually focused more on the after effects of what occurred, rather than staying in the present where we'd experienced the trauma and suffering for the 9 episodes. With the show touching on Ole Munch's true identity, the change that he underwent, the show's core focus on the theme of the rich, poor, and how people are taken advantage of. Let's jump right into this video and crack on with it. Here is Fargo Season 5 Episode 10 Ending Explained. Just to let you know, this video will contain spoilers. The first thing I want to touch on in this finale is the opening section. I thought the first 5 minutes and 25 seconds was just perfect. In fact, the first 2.5 minutes were really good. This episode began with Gator out in the open, blinded and struggling following his father leaving him in a vulnerable position during the previous episode, after essentially saying that he was now useless. I really felt the helplessness that Gator had and the fact that he truly felt as though he was on his own. The thick mist in the environment and the small figure of Gator in an open plain was something which really landed across the screen, and the vulnerability and sense of being lost was something which I truly felt. Finishing with the shot of him walking through the tunnel where the camera was twisting around. It added to the disorienting nature that I feel he was feeling, but I also feel it was symbolic of what was about to come and how the tables were truly going to be turning. With the show then cutting across all different parts of the ranch where we saw everybody essentially getting ready for battle, with tense string music playing over the top, it provided the setup for what was to come and the hostility and eruption that we would go on to see. With Gator emerging from the hole and the music cutting out and it just being silent as he called for help. It marked the beginning of the end of the season, and it was a great way for it to open. The ranch. Whilst we all thought that the final episode might have been this epic battle, it kind of never arrived. Whilst I'm not dissatisfied with the fact that it wasn't as big as what I thought it would be and ultimately take the main focus, I would say there's a part of me that is just a little bit disappointed with how Roy just turned a corner and was then shot by Dorothy, but I kinda get why it happened like that. I feel the show was going for a more real approach, and we'd already seen Dorothy endure trauma at the hands of Roy, so there wasn't really a need for it to be repeated again. If anything, it took me by surprise, and it did end up adding to the more shocking nature. Whilst I was prepping for an all-out battle, we got something a bit more personal and intimate, and I kinda liked it. Roy killing Karen's father was a moment that came as a shock to me too, just due to how abrupt it was, kind of tying into the theme of the finale, abrupt actions. But it was one of Roy's true final acts of showing just how evil he was. With the police force closing in on the ranch, Roy escaped, and we then had a sequence which contained the fighting between both sides taking place, and an effect where it kept fading to black between shots, adding to the suspense that was present, and it almost being like us blinking and opening our eyes and seeing it at a completely different time. I like the fact that the show did this, as it provided a different tone to what I expected. Rather than us seeing everything, it allowed us to have time to breathe amongst the chaos and truly see how the characters were feeling, rather than seeing them just running away, hiding, or looking to escape amongst the madness. So I feel this worked really well. This was what led Witt Farr to go off to find Roy, and following the trail of blood, he found him in the underground tunnel where he planned on escaping at the other side. I'm not gonna lie, I was gutted when Roy killed Witt Farr. I didn't expect it, but the show continued to deliver surprising blows in the finale, and this was one of them. What I found interesting in this moment was that Roy said how he was shot in the stomach by a female, and the way that he said it, he was almost ashamed of the fact that a woman had got one over on him. His entire adult life, he had spent belittling women and making them feel worthless, so much so that he was now on the receiving end of a wound from a woman, something that he couldn't quite believe. He was only used to dishing out the blows. Within this moment too, we heard Roy refer to himself as an emissary of the Lord, and that he needed to pass as his destiny was on the other side of the tunnel, meaning that he felt as though he was on a mission to preach and propagate the Lord's word, showing that he valued himself above all others and felt he had a divine right to do as he pleased, because he felt he was acting in the name of the Lord. And with Witt not letting him pass, he was sadly attacked by Roy and killed. Like I said, I was gutted and I really wanted him to survive. With Roy making it to the other side of the tunnel, as he escaped, the FBI and the troops were on the other side of the exit waiting, due to Gator revealing Roy's escape route and knowing which way he would likely come out, showing that Gator, the person that once looked up to his father and wanted to be him, eventually saw the evil that was inside of him and realized that he needed to be stopped. It took Gator being blind and losing his vision to truly see who his father actually was, marking a change in the character and a moment of redemption. It didn't redeem the character as he'd done so much wrong, but it showed that he was on the pathway of changing. With Dorothy and Gator sharing an embrace at the end where he apologized to her as well, it showed that he was a changed man and would be different moving forward, albeit now without eyes and spending most of his life behind bars. There was a moment where Gator asked Dorothy if she did actually see his mother, Linda, and she responded by saying how she thought that she did, but she was just a beautiful angel in a dream. I think this was Dorothy's way of saying to Gator that she was dead without the harsh truth of the fact that she was. Referring to her as an angel was a softer way for her to relay the news to him. I was quite surprised that she hugged Gator in that moment and was kind to him, considering all that he had participated in when it came to everything that she'd been through. But maybe she saw Gator as just as much of a victim of Roy's actions as what she was, but just in a different way, molding Gator's mind and manipulating him in that way. The hug that they shared was very similar to the one that we saw in episode 7 with the puppets, and it marked the end of Dorothy's time on the ranch. Lorraine Lyon's feelings towards Dorothy were completely different to the start, and we saw their relationship change completely once she returned back home. Lorraine said the line, "That's my girl," when she found out that Dorothy shot Lorraine in the stomach, and then they both hugged. Something that it seemed like they'd never done before. Lorraine originally didn't think that Dorothy was good enough to be with her son, but I think after seeing everything that she went through when she looked through her file, she realized just how much of a warrior she was, and that her son was in fact lucky to have somebody like her. The prison. One of my favorite scenes in the finale came in the prison, just with the way that it was executed. 1 year later, we caught up with Lorraine and Roy as they were meeting over a table in a visiting room in prison. This was something which tied back into the overarching theme of the season, which was the divide that was present between the rich and the poor, and how the rich essentially have the poor in their pockets due to the debts that they owed. With Roy behind bars, Lorraine revealed to Roy how over 80% of prisoners are in debt, something which she was familiar with due to the company that she owned. Plus, she also said how she was the largest donor to the Federalist Society, which is the group which controlled the courts and the judges. So she was essentially saying how he was going to be stuck inside for a long time with no leniency whatsoever due to her influence. After this, she mentioned how all of the prisoners that were in debt, she was essentially helping them out with it, and giving them money in their commissary accounts in order to make Roy's time in jail a living hell. The way he described prison as the way the world should be, where people were separated by races, how the strong would kill the weak and only the tough survive, was a world that he'd no longer wish to be in. As Lorraine broke the news to him that basically all of the prisoners were being paid to make sure that he stayed alive and suffered, the whole room went completely silent, and we heard Lorraine say that she wanted him to feel everything that his wives did: the fear, the pain, and the shame. Having the surrounding audio cut out as she said that, it really made us understand it from Roy's perspective, and make Lorraine's harsh truth hit with so much more impact. With Lorraine leaving Roy and looking down at the table, his lifetime of fear had only just begun, and you could tell that he was deeply concerned about his future. That worry that Lorraine wanted him to feel had arrived. Roy had become one of the very people that he used to wave his power over. He was the weak link in this, and he didn't know what to do. Ole Munch. The final 20 minutes of Fargo was where the real meat and juice came from when it came to the story. A whole year later, we saw that Ole had arrived at Dorothy's house. The very house that he was at in the first episode of the show when he kidnapped her and started this whole chain of events. This whole scene allowed us to learn about his past, his origin, and it even tied back to the act of sin eating which we saw taking place in the flashback from around 500 years ago. Ole said, "The man frees the tiger to finish the fight. This does not mean the man is finished with her." The blank stares and ominous music playing in the background truly added to the unpredictable nature of what was to come, and this ending could have truly gone in a number of different ways, but it actually turned into a beautiful one. We saw Ole in an environment that he'd never experienced before. The orange pop looked out of place in his hand. The fact that he didn't know how to respond to a handshake, conversation happening between people at a rapid pace with people interjecting was something that he clearly wasn't used to. and it was almost like his introduction to this modern world despite having lived in it for a long time. Ole Munch was there because he felt as though a debt needed to be paid to him. A man's flesh was taken and a pound of flesh was required in return. This was something which again tied into the common theme of the season of the show, which was being indebted to somebody. Ole Munch was slaughtering Roy's men until he got paid because he was owed money that wasn't paid up. So it was something that he took seriously, hence why he felt as though he couldn't just back down from the tradition that was ingrained within him. However, Dorothy questioned his logic in saying that debt should be forgiven under certain circumstances, which she felt as though she was in due to the fact that Roy was an evil person, and it caused her to do something that she wouldn't have done if she wasn't put in that situation. She wanted him to resist the code that he had, and by inviting him to stay for dinner, it was something that started the process of him changing. When asked where he came from, he said that he came from a time where he was across the sea from a time of the Arapaho, the Cree, and the Tonkawa, all North American native tribes, showing just how old the character was. Ole mentioned the night of when he was a sin eater several hundred years ago, and that he was paid a couple of coins by the rich to take on their sins by dining over a body, tying into the fact that he was once a poor person and was barely able to survive and essentially taken advantage of by the rich. And since that day, he hasn't been able to sleep, dream, grow old, or even die, and has only taken on sin. Ole was a victim of debt from a time that was far different to the one that we now know. The final shot that we had was of him receiving a biscuit from Dorothy, where she said that the cure for him was to eat something which was made from love and joy, which would allow him to be forgiven. The awkward nature of him eating the biscuit and the look of him savouring it, concluding with a smile on his face, showed that he'd never been on the receiving end of love, care, or joy, and that his life was only ever darkness, death, and living by somebody else's rule. This offering to him was almost symbolic of the fact that he could live his own life, and that he didn't have to live by this code that didn't even exist in reality, just one that he put upon himself in order to live his life by. Overall review. I thought this season of the show was just simply remarkable. I would say that during the first few episodes of the season, I was starting to question where it was going to go, and if it was going to be any good. But episode 7 onwards, it really elevated where it was, the direction that it was going to be going in, and it made the story so gripping that it was hard to look away. Whilst the finale wasn't what I expected it to be, it was brilliant in a different way. For me, Juno Temple and Jon Hamm absolutely smashed it out the park with their roles in this season of the show. Their characters were so convincing and they were just a pleasure to watch. I'd even say that Juno Temple deserves the most credit because this was the most different type of role to what I've seen her in before, and she carried it so well. I loved the Easter eggs throughout this season of the show which connected to the movie, and despite there not being loads, there was just enough to keep it feeling connected and like it was all part of the same universe. Season 5 of Fargo feels like it saved the show a little bit, which is good. There's not been any talks of it being canned, which is good as well. So hopefully that means there's more to come in the next year or so. At least I hope there is. I'd quite like to see a season that goes back a few years again. I love getting an insight into the past, and this show would be a great way of doing it. I mentioned last week about doing a breakdown on the Fargo movie, and I'm currently working on it, and I'm planning to have it out before the end of this week. I'm hoping in the next couple of days, so make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss out when it comes. I also just want to finish this video by saying a massive thanks for tuning into the breakdowns every week on the show. It's been great discussing the show with you all and getting into the theories in the comments. TV shows are always great to watch, but it's having the discussions afterwards which make them even better. So thanks for that. So, there you have it. Fargo Season 5 Episode 10 Ending Explained.